you're a good man. I just wish you'd done it before he worked himself into the grave.
It was 4 years ago that Red Dead Redemption 2 broke my soul. And so I thought, no more. The pain is now gone. All the shameful tears that I had to drop for a game were dealt with. But then again, so I thought.
Oh, Dutch. He's right. You know it, and I know it. He's sick. He's dying. I gave you all I had. I did.
Replaying this game made me dwell into an emotional state that I never thought I could get by playing a story that I already experienced before. But time and time again, Arthur's life path reminds me what an absolute one-of-a-kind masterpiece that is Red Dead Redemption 2. In fact, I went into this playthrough with the objective of speedrunning the game for the sake of recording clips. But my god, it was physically impossible for me to do so. Dude, I can't speedrun this game. Even the seemingly irrelevant side missions allow the game to show Arthur's true nature and build his character even past his own existence. It's no surprise that Rockstar Games makes incredibly epic stories, but it was never to the extent of us considering it of the same narrative quality of a Telltale game, for example, that is riddled with life decisions and choices that will affect your character. To have that story complexity, character development, and rising tension all in one open world game, it is simply groundbreaking. We start off the game with a typical Rockstar character described as an outlaw by its own game, which inserts a typical image of a lowlife in your mind. A man who is comfortable with hurting folks for its own benefit and with extreme prejudice if needed.
Sell your place.
We already owe more than it's worth.
Then sell your wife, or your family, or something. We ain't your idea of charity. Is that clear?
While viewing this from an out-of-context point of view, you will judge Arthur as a ruthless thief and heartless animal. This man will use violence even in the most peaceful of interactions.
There's none of us forced liquor down his throat, friend. I just want him to play.
Now, firstly, we ain't friends. Don't make no mistake on that subject. Now, secondly, he can't hardly see, let alone reason. Now, reasoning ain't never been one of my strong points neither, but seeing I do just fine. You want to step outside or deal with business here?
I just want him to finish the game.
As if this man was born in violence and molded by it. And truth be given, due to Dutch's influence, this is exactly what happened, and Arthur himself admits this to be the case.
This country is man unleashed. That's the thing, and it ain't my fault any more than it's anyone else.
Man unleashed? Then unleash goodness, not just hell's feeble brothers, sir.
But how? I mean, all I know how to do is fight, I guess. I was set free to fight.
But as all human beings, there's a nuance. As you will quickly realize throughout the game, Arthur, for the most part, has a motive that goes beyond his own satisfaction. He usually shows restraint in helping random strangers, perhaps, but when it comes to the group of people that he views himself as responsible in protecting and supplying for, he barely spends a single second deciding if he should help or not.
That does not look ideal.
Excuse me. Get your hands off her. Who are you?
A friend of mine.
Get the hell off of her, you son of a bitch.
So clearly there's more to this profile of a man than what it meets the eye. The most important plot points for the development of Arthur's character were not even inserted into the main missions of the game. Oftentimes these missions that made Arthur fall into a spiral of moral compromise were actually treated as a sort of side quest, almost as if there was some errand that you had to do after a big mission.
Mr. Morgan!
Herr Strauss?
That man. The debtor, Thomas Downs, apparently he's dead.
Dead? Huh. Well, he didn't seem very well.
When you see Micah Bell in the prologue, your mind goes immediately to think this guy is gonna be the doom of Arthur. And maybe you'll still be correct on that, But I will argue that Strauss had a bigger effect on how Arthur ended up living his life up until his last breath.
Leaving Dutch's bluster about us helping folk.
It's legal work, Mr. Morgan.
As I said, Arthur will spare no measure when it comes to protecting the gang, so to him it seemed like collecting debts from some poor old saps would be the least of these sins. However, it is in this segment where the journal proves itself to be such an amazing storytelling piece that most forget to check when understanding the internal hardships of Arthur. Even though Arthur might have an awakening at the end of the story,
You and me, we ain't decent. But those folk, they was.
he already felt a type of way when collecting these debts, even in the beginning of our journey. Herr Strauss is back lending money and I'm back collecting it. The work mostly revolts me and shames me. Somehow robbing people honestly with a gun and fist is less repellent than robbing them fully in accordance with the law. You'll be the usual sort of desperados, sick farmers, pregnant maids, lovesick young men, and other dupes desperate enough and stupid enough to take Strauss's terms. A usurer's life may be a comfortable one, but it is foul work. The Downs family was truly his turning point, even besides the fact that Dutch fell more and more into a pit of craziness and delusion.
What is going on, Dutch? What is happening to us? What's happening to you?
It was Arthur's internal fight with accepting what he has done to the Downs family that makes some life changes for the little life that he had left.
Listen, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what happened. I was a fool. And I'm suffering for my foolishness. But don't go and get yourself killed because of your pride. You have a son, Mrs. Downs.
I'm just so ashamed.
This resonated with Arthur deeply, because he knew one thing or two about feeling ashamed for his actions. But to see a mother feel ashamed for what she had to do to protect her son, for something that Arthur caused, it destroys every single fiber that he has.
I don't want your money.
Yeah, I know you don't want it.
I don't.
You sure as shit need it. Take it.
No.
I ain't looking for forgiveness. It ain't about that. But don't forgive me. Just take the money and get out of here, please. I know I ruined your life. I suffer for it every day. But don't let yourself get killed for pride. I seen it kill too many folk. Don't say anything. Don't thank me. Just take the money and pack your bags. That's all I gotta say.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
I said don't thank me.
Notice how Arthur refuses the gratitude of the Downs boy. He doesn't do this to seem humble. It honestly pains him to hear them thank him after destroying their lives. Even though Arthur's path seems to be the path of redemption, he himself recognizes that he can't undo all the damage that he has done his entire life in just a few months. And it's interesting to see how Rockstar contrasted Arthur's hypocrisy with reality, when he is tasked by Strauss to collect the money from a man who shares the same name as his.
Arthur Londonderry.
Naming this debtor Arthur is a deliberate move by the writers with the objective of almost creating a sort of alternate universe where Arthur himself could be the one in the low point of his life. And when Arthur tries to collect the debt of this hard-working, exploited man, he is confronted in the ultimate showmanship of hypocrisy.
You might get something off his widow just across from Butcher's Creek, but I'd hurry. You ain't gonna be the only one a-knocking.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Hey, I ain't the godforsaken moneylender.
How can Arthur be revolted at the man's sense of humor when it was Arthur and Strauss themselves that exploited the fragile situation of this family man? This is when Arthur really faces it head on. It's another body that falls without a bullet, and he realizes his justifications make sense no more.
How did you get on, Mr. Morgan?
Just dandy. Just get up.
What?
Get up.
What is wrong?
Nothing's wrong. Nothing at all.
What are you doing?
Something I should have done a long time ago. Get your bag. Is this it?
I don't understand.
I ain't gonna kill you. Though I probably should. You disgust me. And you shame us. If we could be shamed any more than we already are. That should do. Go!
I don't understand you. What are you doing?
Go and get a job!
You know, they say the sick delude themselves. I was your friend.
You and me, we ain't decent. But those folk, they was.
So when Arthur finally approaches a family, every single piece of that emotional encounter is heartfelt.
Mrs. Londonderry.
Arthur's dead.
I know. I'm sorry for it. It's just... we lent Arthur some money, you see, and...
So it was you. You son of a bitch. What do you want now? You want my boy's shoes? You want the food out of our bellies, what little there is? You want me to lie down for you?
No.
Arthur gave everything to pay your bills. Everything. And now there's some fellas coming to take the house. There ain't nothing left, mister!
No matter what kind of karma you had during this gameplay, if it's good or evil, Arthur will always cancel the debt at least.
I just wanted to say the debt's canceled and here, take this. It won't bring your husband back, I know. You need money and I don't.
Well, you're a good man. I just wish you'd done it before he worked himself into the grave. But you know, maybe you and your friend that lent him the money could do things differently. Like, not threaten a man. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I really am.
But once again, Arthur is too late. The damage is done. But when he finally finds a family, a future-to-be family, that just lost all possessions they could possibly have but one, he just decides to give life a chance.
Damn the dad. Just get her somewhere safe. Go on.
Thank you, fella. You know, there ain't enough kindness in this world, that's for sure. But you...
I don't know nothing about kindness.
Even though the debts and the loan sharking are one of the main moral challenges that Arthur faces during his redemption path,
You got tuberculosis. Really sorry for you, son. It's a hell of a thing.
it's very clear that the downfall of Dutch's code and the gang is one of the main breakpoints of Arthur's character.
To be fair, Arthur, trouble has a habit of finding you, too.
Yeah, but we run with our code. Always have.
My whole code that I lived and killed by, was it true? Or was there a bigger truth I was too dumb to ever see? But I'm gonna say something controversial here. Even though it is sad to see the gang fall apart, it is Dutch's progressive fall into insanity that saves Arthur.
Hey now!
Dutch, what are you doing? Jesus. Easy, Dutch. You sure you're all right, Dutch?
I'm just trying to make sure that some of us survive, Arthur.
Almost as a moment of emancipation for Arthur to finally clearly see objectively what his life was and how it was gonna end. A crucial character that many ignore in Arthur's development, it's actually Charles.
In a way, it is a gift to know. In a way, you were lucky.
Sure don't feel like that.
You still have time to make amends. The others, Hosea, Lenny, Sean, all them, they didn't. And what about the Calendar boys? Both killed trying to escape Blackwater? More vicious pair of bastards than ever was. And that's all they ever were and will be.
Charles is 100% correct about this perspective. Even if he came from hardships and the overall downfall of the gang, Arthur's death sentence removed any kind of objective centered around Arthur's survival. As I said before, Arthur can be portrayed as a bad man, but Micah Bell is inserted in the story to provide a clear example that there can be different types of reasons for why you do evil things.
had something of mine. My guns.
Making a house call in the middle of all that?
Ain't much I care about more than those guns.
That much is clear.
It is very clear that Arthur hurt people to help his own people, while Micah hurt people to help himself.
You're right! I'm a survivor, Black Lung! A survivor! That's all there is! Living and dying!
With this survival instinct gone, Arthur could now focus in simply doing good for others. His lust for money was gone. You cannot take your money to the grave, so he started giving. He rushed into decisions of almost certain death just to help people.
Me and Charles will try and rescue your son. No. Yes. I ain't got much to lose, and you got... I'm doing this.
Charles never allowed Arthur to downplay the trace of humanity that Arthur tried so desperately to hide. He almost felt shame in showing a bit of affection towards anyone that is outside of the gang.
You're a gentleman, sir. A gentleman. No, not really. I was just trying to impress the women.
Well, Arthur, I'm proud of you.
To be honest, if you lot hadn't been here, I probably would have robbed him.
Well, you did.
Arthur didn't view himself as a good man. He refused himself to do so. And he tried to do the same thing with Charles, but Charles didn't play it off as a joke or accept it and conformed.
Where did they take him?
Ain't no business of ours. I don't even speak their language.
You ain't as tough and dense as all that. Come on, Arthur.
He knew that this was a coping mechanism that was instilled in Arthur ever since he was 15 years old by Dutch. Because what you can notice during the whole playthrough is that when alone, Arthur will try the utmost to help people even when he doesn't have to.
Can I hold you a second, mister?
Okay, just quickly.
Helping that German family despite the language barriers proved itself to be almost like a salvation for Arthur, as the same family that he helped being reunited were also the ones that saved him from dying in the middle of a dark forest alone.
Wenn ich besser Englisch könnte. Sie haben uns gerettet, als wir wirklich Hilfe brauchten.
It is such a beautiful piece of work when you see plots delivering examples of good reaping more good. This surely helped Arthur realize that goodness is not a weakness, especially when you do it without expecting something in return. Because the same way evil roots more evil,
You don't get to live a bad life and have good things happen to you.
good will also root more good.
Dankeschön. Thank you. Vielen Dank, herzlichen Dank.
Guess it was a pleasure.
It could be argued that a very, very young Dutch could have had the same mentality at some point, but more and more, with influence from Micah Bell, the survivor mentality applied in situations of apparent good actions but with ulterior motives.
Besides, it's perfect. People will see these boys, they won't notice us, and they'll think we're gone. Everyone will blame everything on the Indian problem, and we'll disappear up the river.
So, you're using them?
No, sir. No. Never. But
It was also Charles that highlighted a major logic flaw that plagued the gang ever since Blackwater.
Death, and for what? Just so we can have enough money to be able to run away from what we've done?
And believe it or not, I'm actually gonna pull The Sopranos into this, because there's a recurrent theme of outlaws thinking that all they need to do to absolve their sins is more money.
23 years of donations to your parish, and this is what this guy sees hanging over me? I should have had immunity to all of this shit. I should have been covered by my donations.
Which, ironically, if they didn't get themselves into this life in the first place, there would be no sins need washing. The gang kept killing and killing once they realized that there will never be enough to escape the big prize on top of their heads. Arthur may have realized this a bit too late, but it was an important factor that drove him to distance himself from the gang more and more. Kieran was also a really good character that highlighted how idiotic it was for Dutch to think his gang was more than just a bunch of criminals.
You know, you all ain't that different from the O'Driscolls.
What did you just say? Tell us then. How are we like those mongrel dogs?
You're outlawed like them. You're out to survive like them. You live rough. You live hard. fighting the law, nature. You're out for yourselves.
See? This is why you're an O'Driscoll, O'Driscoll. You're out to survive. We're out to live. Free.
Now, it could be argued that Colm O'Driscoll treated his men more like a financial organization, but in the end, their methods and objectives were almost similar. Furthermore, the betrayal of Dutch towards John and Arthur himself, in completely obvious examples, by the way.
Dad? I need help! You ran away.
Oh, I did no such thing.
Also made Arthur realize what truly matters is to save those that would do a positive change in the world, like John and his family.
I feel like you should take your woman and child and get lost.
Do you?
You could give something to Jack. It's that or... Well, I don't see no way out of this.
Because what were Dutch's worth? That was a real tongue twister, I know. What were they worth if his actions did not reflect his teachings? For all this time, Dutch preached a life of liberty. Feed folks that need feeding, after all. But if you objectively look at their path as almost like you were an NPC, all he could watch was a trail of destruction and death. Blackwater, Valentine, Strawberry, Rhodes, Saint Denis, even a miserable mining city like Ansburg was plagued by Dutch's wrath. This might have destroyed Arthur, as Dutch was the closest thing that he had to a proper father figure.
I had fun with you today. I was gonna say you're like a son to me, but you're more than that.
But all he could do now was see a madman trying to salvage a little control that he had.
Look at what you've become.
Well, if you have all the answers, please lead us to the promised land.
All these circumstances might seem sad for you to see. What once the gang was,
Is a bully boy, come pledge me on his ground.
versus what turned out to be. Despite that, if this breakdown didn't happen, we would probably have a dead John, Abigail and Jack, Tilly, Karen, Mary Beth, and many other innocent people, where the biggest sin was to be desperate enough to loan from a loan shark in the pursuit of something unobtainable. In fact, it was Dutch's code that had Molly killed for nothing.
You...
She knew the rules, Arthur.
And ironically, Miss Grimshaw herself getting also killed for nothing. Arthur realized that the time for this kind of outlaw is gone. The world is now civilized, the criminals that trade guns for banks and chaps for suits. And instead of fighting it, the main difference between Dutch and Arthur ended up being acceptance of reality instead of fighting an enclosing room.
Maybe time for folks like us is past. We don't need a rat. We got sloppier than the town drunk.
This blind chase for a tropical island,
Tahiti,
spiraled so much into chaos that resulted in Dutch seeing someone he considered to be his son die at his feet.
I gave you all I had. I did.
It is uncertain if this was the moment when Dutch first had, even if so tiny, a moment of clarity. The one man who grew up shaped completely by his philosophy, dying, repulsed by how much he hated how both he and Dutch turned out to be as men. Even with this immense delusion, he was not able to take Micah's side. Not this time.
Come on, Dutch. Come on! Ah!
Many players analyze Arthur's interaction with Sister Calderon as a way to reflect how his life can be perceived very differently to a stranger in a much more forgiving way than Arthur allowed himself to be.
I've lived a bad life, sister.
We've all lived bad lives, Mr. Morgan. We all sin.
However, I personally enjoy much more the storyline path where Reverend Swanson becomes Arthur's moral checkpoint in Emerald Ranch.
Reverend?
You see, Reverend Swanson is not a stranger to Arthur's life decisions. He knew Arthur for more than just a few months and had a true comparison that Sister Calderon could never have. Even though I understand a lot of the statements and arguments which Sister Calderon supported, she could never truly know the magnitude of the damage that Arthur created during his life on Earth. The reason why Reverend Swanson is an amazingly underrated character is because the Reverend himself is a reflection of Arthur's path, but in reverse. Reverend Swanson was someone who devalued his life with a serious addiction to morphine, alcohol, self-loathing, and overall self-destructive behavior.
What the hell is wrong with you? What the hell is wrong with you? Throwing me off a bridge like that? There was a goddamn train, you crazy bastard!
Have I been bad again, Mr. Morgan?
While Arthur was hurting people to make himself and the gang gain benefits, Swanson tried to damage himself as most as he could. But eventually, when Arthur is diagnosed with tuberculosis and turns his life around with the little time that he had left, Reverend Swanson turns his life around while there's still more to give.
I'm a changed man, Arthur. I can't die for a bunch of nonsense sprouted by a fool.
I understand.
And Reverend Swanson does not save any punches when he meets Arthur in Emerald Ranch before he leaves the gang for good.
Well, you're not a good man, Arthur, but you're not all bad either.
He recognized that Arthur did bad things that never really turned him into an evil man per se, but he could have become a much better man. But despite all this, Reverend Swanson still sees the value of Arthur's life as a whole.
Your journey, your path will be just fine.
And how could Reverend Swanson judge this man for the same path that he took? If Reverend Swanson saw a clear path for himself, then why couldn't Arthur?
I'm worried my path is coming to an end, Mr. Swanson.
Maybe. I felt that way for a long time about myself. But you'll do what's right.
Just because Arthur's days were counted did not lighten the actions that he could still make something that would still turn out to be a positive thing for many people.
I don't know about that.
I do. Save who you can and let the rest rot. And look after yourself.
Maybe.
I understand people like non-linear stories that can have surprises as you play the game differently each time, but I really wish that we could have somehow had both Calderon and Reverend Swanson giving their perspective on Arthur, because even if they do come from different places, the conclusion is the same. Arthur would not be a bad man for the bad things that he did, but he would have been a bad man if he chose to continue being bad, which he didn't.
We'll see.
You do see. You just can't quite admit it to yourself.
All aboard!
You lived your life like a man, Arthur, and you turned into a good man. If we were all like you, things might have turned out differently.
You're getting mighty sentimental, Reverend.
One of the many hurdles that Arthur faced was not him trying to be a good person, but rather be open and allow himself to do good things. Because when someone offers a couple of years to listen, he will turn on a faucet that doesn't stop pouring.
Been acting kinda crazy.
Mm-hmm. How so?
I've been killing a lot. Innocent folk. I don't know why.
He cares less and less about dodging his own feelings and what kind of message this could transmit. And his interaction with the Indian tribe of Chief Rainfalls shows exactly that. Rewind some mere months and Arthur would give a rat's ass about the tribe getting vaccines or not. But now, not only he is willing, he speaks as if it was his own community being affected by the actions of the army.
Just stuck here trying to make the best of things.
This is the best of things. Children dying of diseases.
No. This is awful.
Where is this wagon? Where can we find it?
I can show you. It's supposed to be heading to a pediatric coming up through Valentine, but it's been diverted south instead.
Come on, Captain Monroe. Mr. Morgan.
The truth is, Arthur sees a much bigger sense of community in the people led by Rainfalls than what he saw by his own mentor, Dutch. Arthur absolutely admired Chief Rainfalls, because in a way he saw firsthand Dutch's ability to corrupt a group of people that are desperate. In a way, he could see what happened to the gang from an outside perspective.
My friend, I'm sorry. About this, about all of this.
You have nothing to be sorry for.
You know, Dutch is... I guess my thinking is he used you. He wasn't trying to help anyone but himself and his own crazy principles.
We're grown men. Nobody made us do anything.
Maybe I'm talking for my people as much as for yours.
It also drove him to go behind Dutch's back, his mentor, in a way to correct all the damage that he has been doing in the background, which is something that he wished that he could have done much earlier. And seeing Dutch indoctrinate the chief's son with promises of violence and blood loss for the greater good.
I like you, son. And after the horses, are we gonna wait for the army to come and wreak its revenge?
I hope not.
Of course we ain't. Now let's go check out that fort of theirs.
Put everything into perspective as to why Arthur was the man that he was today. Because let's not forget that Arthur didn't have to go down this path in life. That to be in the position that he is today, he had to give up something that he held dear to his life.
You'll never change. I know that.
And if that isn't enough, he also even lost a son to pursue a life that would grant him irrefutably no benefit.
Isaac, his mother, Eliza, the waitress I met. When she got pregnant, she knew who I was, what my life was.
Seeing Rainfalls, a good man, lose his son because of Dutch's rhetorics, pushed Arthur to the edge. This is the moment when Arthur realizes the man who he knew once was no more. It is also important to highlight how Rainfalls, a good man who hated violence, looked at Arthur in the eyes and said,
But I know now that you don't get to live a bad life and have good things happen to you.
I think you're being hard on yourself.
And Chief Rainfalls has a point in thinking about Arthur as a completely different person than the rest. Because even with a gang that was already pretty divided at this point, he was able to convince Dutch that thought Arthur didn't trust him anymore.
You help this fella, Arthur? Please.
What of it?
What else you been doing behind Dutch's back?
What?
To go and help the Indians when the gang had very little concern to do so.
Charles, who else will come with me?
Oh, all right, Arthur. Who knows what other secrets I'll learn about? Who else?
I will.
And me. Me too.
Oh, and me. I guess.
His interaction with the Indian tribe is also a good representation of how ahead of its time Arthur was. He gave very little shit about how society viewed typical situations. When there was a way to help women get their vote, he showed no restraint in helping.
Penelope, I beg you. I'll tell you what. Your friend here can drive the wagon for us. It'll allow us to shout all the louder. Hooray!
Sure.
Even if he had conservative viewpoints in specific situations, like how he always suggested Sadie Adler to be in the kitchen duty, for example.
I'll work, but not this.
Well, ain't cooking work?
He allowed people to prove themselves, and as soon as he realized that this woman had a harder skin than he thought, he didn't hesitate in giving her a gun and letting her help. Being a woman was not a constraint to him. Hell, sometimes she wouldn't even need a gun, to be honest. He felt no fear in hugging a man on public display. And he surely didn't see horses as mere transportation, because whatever you do in this game, nothing beats the emotional scene of keeping the first horse and see him die as Arthur takes time from combat to just thank an animal. Players like John Marston, but even though his horse also died, he didn't seem to give a lot of shit, but Arthur did.
Come on, brother. Let's go.
Give me a sec.
Come on. Push, Arthur.
Thank you.
Arthur!
So what is Arthur's final tally? Was he a good man or a bad man? Well, that's the thing. This game never really made it about his tally. Like good deeds would erase bad deeds. Life in itself is a balance of all deeds, good or bad. But one thing that we can say about Arthur is that it is surely a good sign when people who knew him for so little time remembered him so fondly.
Years ago, a friend of mine helped you retrieve your horse and your leg.
Oh, yeah. Come on in. Arthur, wasn't it?
That's the one. He, passed soon after that.
Sorry to hear that. It's nice to meet you. He was a kind man to me.
That's funny. You used to know a fella a bit like you. A few years back. Crazy kind of fella. But he had a heart on him.
I think he died.
They always do. The good ones.
Now, I understand that many people's complaint in this game is how being evil is not really an option. Arthur will always end up trying to amend some of his mistakes in life. Or at the very least, it does not affect the grand scheme of things. But it is important to highlight that Rockstar limited these options on purpose to drive a consistent and coherent narrative. A narrative that is about redemption not being a destination but rather a path, allowing the player to really create a character arc on their own, affected by the gameplay itself. You can hurt innocent people, rob them, lose your temper, and Arthur will face these depictions of his life as being a lone wolf, a clear symbolism of obvious, careless and selfish demeanor, but still allowing for its path to take a 180 spin if you so wish to do so. But I will say he must have done something right. Because for players who were excited to play as John Marston again, to see that they would spend a large part of this new game as a completely different character, and end up loving playing as Arthur more than they actually like to play their favorite protagonist that they already knew, well, that speaks volumes about what kind of man Arthur was.